Live on Channel 5 with Jacqui and Kulveer. Later, should the NHS give out free vapes in A&E to help smokers quit? Because that's the plan. First, is the government to blame for record channel migrants? I just want to say, by the way, we showed that graphic earlier of, the interactive map. And I know you might be interested in looking at your own area. So this is what we were showing of how we swept through the country. It's the Environment Agency website. I may not have credited them. So they've done a fantastic job there putting it together. If you want to have a look at your own area, Environment Agency website. Provisional Home Office figures show a record number of migrants have crossed the English Channel so far this year. 4,644 people have made the journey, a record for the first 3 months of a calendar year. The previous record for January to March was in 2022, which was 45,000 crossing the Channel in small boats across the entire year. So we're well on the way to that this year. Labour have reacted to the figures, saying it was time to get a grip and restore order to the border. Easier said than done. Rishi Sunak made it one of his key priorities. This is the problem for Mr Sunak. He did really tell us explicitly about 14 months ago, these were his: halve inflation, grow the economy in recession, reduce debt, cut NHS waiting lists. This was the thing: stop the small boats. And the small print says we'll bring in laws to make it clear that if you come to this country illegally, you will be swiftly removed. Now, they could say, well, the Rwanda law is in the pipework. But actually, if you look at the big print, and we've got it over here at the front, we'll leave it up in the studio. The small boats was a pretty clear promise, wasn't it? Stop the small boats. It couldn't be clearer, Kulveer. So is it time for the government to say, we can't do this?
No, I don't think so. I think what the Prime Minister and the government have been demonstrating is that they've been throwing the kitchen sink at this to try to get the right initiatives, the right legislation in place. Now, we do have a rule of law in Parliament here that we have to work through. That's what the government has been working through. The legislation, the Supreme Court, the various blockages that have come in the way of the Rwanda bill.
Is it all? Are you putting all your money on Rwanda?
No, I think the investment that's been put in to help working with the French, working with increasing the process of asylum processing for illegal asylum arrivals, I think all of that is part of it. But we have a problem that's a problem across Europe, and we've got to work at this problem. And I think this is not the government's fault these numbers are coming in. I think we've got to look at people who are also not helping the government. I look at Her Majesty's opposition, Labour Party and others, that are not really saying... They're saying they don't want... They're saying to get a grip, but they're not saying what they're going to do. What would Labour do?
Conservative members of the House of Lords that sit alongside you who are also concerned about the Rwanda bill. One, because it won't work, and two, because actually undermining international law is not a good place for any government to be. I
think we can always have that debate that has been ongoing about law, but here we're looking at something that the Prime Minister, the government have been advised that they can do. They're putting the bill through. It is being blocked by the opposition, the Labour Party, and by crossbenchers in the House of Lords.
There is a majority in the House of Commons. In the House of Commons, there is a majority of Conservatives. The House of Commons sat on Monday and Tuesday this week. If the Prime Minister was that bothered, he could have brought that bill back on Monday and Tuesday. He chose to leave it until after the Easter holidays. And the reason he did that is because he wants to make it a campaigning issue. He doesn't want to solve the problem. He wants headlines, and he wants the sort of allegation that you've just made, which is somehow or another it's the Labour Party's fault when Labour aren't in government.
But broadly, Labour are against it and the government wants to bring it in.
No,
so fair dues, right?
That's not true, Jeremy. Labour is against the Rwanda bill because, Kulveer says the government is throwing the kitchen sink at this issue. Well, they're throwing the kitchen sink at enormous amounts of money to keep people in hotels and on boats and to develop other places. It would be a better idea if they'd actually thrown the kitchen sink at dealing with the asylum backlog, which is 7 or 8 times bigger than it was when Labour left government in 2010.
But they say they've done that. James Cleverly, Foreign Secretary, came out with a massive audit of all the numbers. We've caught up with it, we've done it. And it then turned out, actually, a lot of them had fallen through the gaps.
That's not true. It's over 120,000 now.
Yes.
It was well below 50,000 when Labour left office.
If you come to power, if your party, your former party comes to power, if Labour come in, and they try and do it, they'll find it just as difficult, won't they? And that's the reality.
Look, it is enormously difficult, but other European countries are actually doing it better. I mean, Kulveer is right. We have the 5th highest level of asylum claims in this country, but we are much slower than France, who have more, much slower than Germany, who have more, in actually making the decisions. That's what's going to make the difference. If people thought, if I get to the UK and I haven't got a legitimate claim for asylum and I get sent home, that's what will put people off, not some idea that perhaps, 100 or so people might eventually go to Rwanda. I mean, my view is nobody will ever go to Rwanda, apart from several Home Secretaries to make headlines.
We reached out to those at the Home Office and we asked if they thought the government was to blame, and this is what a spokesman said in response. The unacceptable number of people who continue to cross the channel demonstrates exactly why we must get flights to Rwanda off the ground as soon as possible. We continue to work closely with the French police, who are facing increasing violence and disruption on their beaches as they work tirelessly to prevent these dangerous, illegal and unnecessary journeys. We remain committed to building on the successes that this is a long old statement, saw arrivals drop by more than a third last year, including tougher legislation and agreements with international partners in order to save lives and stop the boats. Is there any more of it? No. Matthew in Worcestershire, hi.
Hi there.
So, do you think that they've absolutely failed and they've just no chance of doing this?
I don't think there is any chance of doing it, and I think my immigration issue is going to be Rishi Sunak's downfall, as with Theresa May was obviously with the Brexit bill, because I think Labour do block it, and I think obviously we need to go back and look at why we gave France £62 million 2 years ago, and those boats are still coming across the channel. Now, there is only a small portion of France to where those boats can actually leave from. So what are the French authorities doing to actually stop those boats from coming across? Because why have we just given them that amount of money to do basically nothing?
There's been some film. Yeah, there's been some film recently of the French trying to sink these boats by basically going in ever decreasing circles around them in motorboats. Whether that's right or wrong, won't pass comment. But the issue today we're discussing is whether the government is to blame for the situation.
No, I don't think they are. I don't think they are to blame. Jacqui, obviously, and you've said on the panel that it is being blocked in Commons, and I don't think it'll ever get past it. I think I think what we need to do as well is stop sensationalising this topic in the country, because it is causing a social sort of split, obviously, in the country about people's opinions.
Well, people are right to be cross about it, aren't they? Because they see, the money spent on hotels. People have come to those decisions because of how the media portray that information and portray that topic and subject. And I think if we stop doing that, actually, then that topic and that issue actually, sort of falls into the background. I don't know. I really worry about the idea, of trying to turn it. Because you could do that. You just turn it down in the media, and no one's bothered about it. That's kind of not the state we live in, though.
I understand what Matthew's saying, and I think people are concerned that is it kept in proportion, but there is an issue. We have to deal with it. The government is trying to deal with it. It's not the government's fault that we have this problem. The government is looking for solutions and trying to resolve the problem.
Well, is it?
Well, if it's not the government's fault or responsibility, why did Rishi Sunak make it one of his 5 pledges? If he can't do anything about it, why is he making
Jacqui,
it a
I didn't
pledge?
say it wasn't the government's responsibility to deal with it. They are trying to deal with it. But then you have to look at, as we've discussed, all the things that are working against the government to get to where they wanted to go, to get the deterrence in place, to work with the other authorities.
You say Labour is the problem?
Well, there is. I know Jacqui's saying that there's a Conservative majority in the House of Lords,
there
but
is.
when you put the Labour and the crossbenchers and the bishops together, the government loses every vote
bill is
in the House of Lords.
No, sorry, Kulveer, you know how the House of Lords works. In the end, the House of Lords will allow this legislation through. They're trying to revise it. It's the House of Commons that will be the determining factor. The Prime Minister chose not to bring it back to the House of Commons before the Easter break.
After the break,
because he's interested in headlines, not solutions.
After the break, we're taking more of your calls on whether the government is to blame for record channel migrants. These numbers will be alarming to some people. 0207 862 2222. But is it the government's fault? See you shortly. We'll be asking if you would go and see the new Michael Jackson musical. I saw it yesterday. It was mind-blowing. But then there are questions when you come out. You think, First, more of your calls on whether the government are to blame for record channel migrants. Give us a call now with your thoughts. 0207 862 2222. So, Terry in Kent, you've been waiting on the line. My friend, what would you like to say?
Yeah, it's not the government's fault. We need that Rwanda plan through. The thing is, you look at it, the last week, there's been an increase in boats coming over to this country. And the reason why is because they want to get here before the Rwanda scheme keeps it big. A young lady on there saying about, we've got to process them quicker and everything else. You can't process them quicker if you've got nowhere for them to go, because if you process them, they've got to land up back in the hotels again. Because
they'll be able to work. They might be able to work. Jacqui, what about that? There's no point processing them because they've got nowhere to live.
Well, I mean, it's a fair point, but you process them in order that you can decide either that they've got a right to stay, in which case they work and they care for themselves and their families, or you return them. And one of the important things that the government also needs to do is to return people who don't have the right to stay here more quickly to their own countries. And that is something that Labour is talking about investing in, getting a special returns unit so that people can, if they don't have the right to stay here, be removed from the country and not sent into enormously expensive hotels.
Like returning people to Afghanistan is going to be tricky, isn't it? Given you've got the Taliban in charge.
But there are other things. Where the government has succeeded is with Albania.
Yeah.
We're getting a deal in place with Albania for returns, quick returns.
And that's worked.
I think it has worked. Is that I think 90%, it was a very high percentage number of people getting returned back to Albania. So it can be done. The government is working on these point-to-point return issues as well. I think there's a lot of work going on here, and I think the public are, and Terry, Matthew before him, are recognising this isn't the government's fault. They're trying to deal with it. But there are political hold-ups and there are challenges that are stopping the Prime Minister and frustrating him. And I think there is a point there that people are seeing these rules coming in and want to get here before it gets harder.
Terry, thank you. Pete in Lincolnshire, hi.
Hello, Jeremy. Nice to speak to you.
And these numbers look high. We won't know till the end of the year if it's been a big year for the dinghies. What do you think?
It's not the government's fault. It's two of the lots of people. One are the peers and two, the human rights.
The human rights and the lords and ladies, yeah.
And the lords and ladies, for the simple reason being, when it was first put in, why didn't they say, these are the changes, and if they're not done as that way, we're going to refuse it? Not muck about little bits here, little bits there, little bits here.
Well, they sort of did that.
Do it.
Yeah.
That's the way the House of Lords works. You propose amendments. You say, well, wouldn't it be better if we did this rather than that? And for example,
instead of saying we want them to do that, if they said instead of doing that, why didn't the Lord say that is the alternative? And if it's not good enough, I'm sorry, we can't do it, and we're not going to accept it. And then with the so if they're not going to give an answer to the question that was put forward to them, they're just going to do like any government or any opposition does. You ask them a question and they give you every 20,000 different bits apart from the proper answer.
OK, Pete, thank you. Kathy in Hertfordshire, hi.
But the other one...
oh, God,
hello.
Sorry, Kathy, yeah. I think you had something to go on to. We'll come back to you, Pete, another day. Kathy in Hertfordshire, hi.
Hello there.
Right. Is it the government's fault, we're asking?
Of course. Who else's fault is it? It's certainly not the people's fault.
Well, I suppose we've had well, you can tell Kulveer that because Kulveer's named another of other guilty parties, including, funny enough, Labour. Oh,
well, I think all of the government are to blame. I mean, people really don't get much of a say in the outcome of things. They seem to continue on their own pathway for whatever reason. They never come back to the people and say, we think we should do money they're spending after all.
Kathy, I understand why you're saying it's the government's fault, but the government is trying to deal with the problem. The challenge they're facing is the opposition, Labour Party, European law, Supreme Court, all of these things that are getting in the way of delivering what the government is trying to do, which is solve the problem and stop these illegal boats. And fundamentally, because we don't want to see people drowning in the English Channel. We don't want to.
Jacqui, you don't like he's mentioning everyone else.
The opposition is completely willing to take on responsibility for this, Kulveer. It just needs Rishi Sunak to call an election.
Long silence ensued. Frederick in Bedfordshire, hello.
Oh, good morning, all.
What do you think, Frederick? Do you think Labour could do it? Can they change this situation?
Yes, because if I remember rightly, France is a safe country, yes?
Yes.
Right. Why is it this government brings them to this country? Why don't they return them back to France?
Okay.
And put the onus on France. We've given them enough money, and Rishi Sunak is going to try and con this country into having another Conservative Party in power.
How do you return them to France, Frederick? Think about this. They get halfway across the channel. You then come with some enormous bow wave or something. You push them back. France says,
pick them up in a boat, and the boat takes them back to Calais.
Okay.
It's France's problem. It's a safe country. Leave them there. Otherwise, innocent people are going to die in this country.
I hear you.
Because you've allowed the immigrants in.
I just don't know whether France would accept us docking boats in Calais.
Let's be clear.
Money off us.
France and Germany already take more asylum seekers than the UK does. Spain and Greece and Italy have more people coming by sea to them. So, I mean, actually, I've got some sympathy with what Frederick says, because there is, where the government did negotiate a returns agreement with Albania and was willing to work with them, it has helped to prevent Albanians coming across the channel.
Yeah, but they were returning Albanians to Albania.
Yeah, but
that's a bit different from returning Afghans to France.
The other thing to remember about very many Afghan refugees is they have a legitimate right to asylum. The point is the decision isn't made quickly enough to enable them to actually start working and to make a contribution to the country, which is what they've come here to try to do. OK. Frederick, thank you. Pushing people back to France, I don't know if this can ever work. Brian in Newport, hello.
Hello.
All right, we're back on this, Brian. Is it the government's fault? Are you thinking, look, we need a new government and then we won't have this problem?
No, it's not the government's fault. It's Labour as well, because Labour have even voted down convicted criminals, the illegal immigrants. They've stopped them from being removed from this country. And then Richie Sunak was on there the other day, or whatever his name is, and he said that he would process the people more quickly, but he couldn't say where they would go if they'd been refused, if they said they was Christian or they were gay and they couldn't go back to their own country.
The first thing you said, Jacqui wants to come back on. Hang on, Brian.
Sorry, Brian, you're just wrong. When Labour was in power, when I was the Home Secretary, more foreign national prisoners were being sent back home than are being now by this government. And also, when I was Home Secretary, I didn't spend my time... I didn't spend my... Yeah, and there was even more than now when Charles Clarke resigned about it, because we took it as a government so seriously.
But I mean, you had the same problem.
If you're in government, just, honestly, get a bit of backbone, stop trying to blame the opposition and crack on and do your job, or stand aside and let somebody else do it.
All right, Brian, thank you very much. Philip in Newcastle, do you think the government should say, because of this issue, we are now calling an election to allow people to choose who's got the right solution here?
Right. Good morning, Jeremy.
Good morning.
The simple answer is, what you need is a few boats in the channel, and as soon as they come across, turn the boats back. Do you see the French or any other country in Europe putting migrants up in hotels, old army bases? See, when they're coming across to Italy and Greece, they're travelling all the way through Europe to get to our shores. Now, to be honest, if I had, I'm so tempted to get on a boat in Dover, go over to France, get off the beach and say, right, I want political asylum. What do you think the French would say to me?
Well, they say you go back. Well, it wouldn't make any sense, would it? You want political asylum because you're at risk in Britain?
No. See, what it is, they know, these migrants know, the minute they step on our shore, they will never, ever be returned. What we need to do is say to the human rights and all these agencies, especially the liberal left, we need to turn around and say, we're not going to listen to you anymore. We're just going to put them on a boat and send them back to France and say, right, France is a safe country. You've got the chart, Europe. You've got all of Europe.
I understand. I was just going to say, what happens when you put this boat in the middle of the channel? It pushes back a boat full of 25 migrants, of whom 10 are young children. It sinks and they die. And someone says, whose idea was that? And you say, oh, it was mine.
Well, what are the French? See, you see stories and pictures on the news of French police actually standing on the French shore, basically letting them get into the boats and go off. Why won't the French
Philip, thanks so much. And food for thought with all the calls. After the break, should the NHS give out free vapes in A&E to help smokers quit? 0207 862 2222. See you in a moment.